Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network. And last weekend at Gateway approved, long shot dreams do come true for those folks that had a little bit of exposure on Austin Cindric. How that's mucked up the playoff picture, to say the least. Everything we learned at the mile and a quarter track, what we expect this weekend at a newly repaved Sonoma, and maybe some betting basics as well. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor and analyst extraordinaire Chris Werme. And Wormser, Austin Cindric, he didn't need, well, I guess he did need some luck, but he found a way to get himself into victory lane, and it wasn't at a road course, breaking an 80-plus race winless drought.
Yeah, impressive by I would say Penske in general, and then more specifically Austin Cindric for just hanging around. This is a William Byron type win for Austin Cindric. You have to put together a complete race. You have to have speed. You have to execute on pit road. You don't necessarily have to have the fastest car, but you need to be there at the end. And congrats to Austin Cindric. That just fell in his lap. I mean, you want to talk about a lucky finish. I think this would fall to as Austin Cindric's luckiest win.
For those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, we break things up around here. Stage one, we'll continue to go into some of our takeaways and learnings of last weekend at Worldwide Technology Raceway, the Go Enjoy Illinois 300. Stage two, a preview of Sonoma. And stage three, kind of a dealer's choice. We'll decide on the fly in terms of what topics we're going to cover there. But, you know, Worm, we say it all the time that Roger Penske owns Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Apparently, Team Penske owns Gateway, because yet again, they unload with rocket ships. And if it wasn't going to be Austin Cindric, it was going to be Ryan Blaney. But even Ryan Blaney might have needed a little bit of help with Christopher Bell having some engine trouble. But how do you not get your car full of fuel? And Blaney, who we all assumed was going to be more or less a shoo-in for the postseason, now has a little bit more work to do than we otherwise anticipated.
I was shocked. I was listening to the Blaney's radio, just winding down the laps, and he's like, "I'm out of fuel." I'm like, "What?" Normally you have an indication.
Yeah,
hey, we're close, or save,
flip over, or whatever it is.
I thought that again, to shout out to Actions Detrimental, Denny did a great job of describing the NASCAR 101 and the fuel, and you weigh it. That's how you know how much fuel you got in it. But it was more a product of them not having as much fuel in the car when they put one can in, and that's what caused them to be a lap short. But man, taking the white and not knowing, that's a tough beat. However, lucky to get there, because in my opinion, Chris Bell all day long was the fastest car. And we've seen a lot of people that feel like this Blaney bad beat is one of the worst beats they've ever seen in NASCAR. And I don't even think it's close.
I remember the first time I bet a NASCAR race and thought I had a bad beat.
Yeah, exactly. You just never know. You can't. I think that wasn't there a tweet that went out that was congratulating Blaney on it? I think Penske tweeted out, "Congratulations, Ryan Blaney, on your first win of the season." That's
as bad as what JGR did when we called out JGR before about watching their first NASCAR race. I mean, it just goes to show. I mean, you mentioned it. You have to be perfect in every aspect of the race, given how close these cars are. And right now, apparently, if you don't put enough fuel in, it's tough to win the race. So Austin Cindric becomes the beneficiary of all of that chaos. And for Team Penske, if you'd have told me that one of their 3 drivers had already secured passage to the postseason at this point in the season, and it was going to be Austin Cindric, not Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Those odds would have been even higher than what Austin Cindric was pre-week to win this race. And when we look at that number there, we've talked at great lengths. I mean, 150 to 1 thereabouts. I think I saw some even higher prices. Biggest driver price that I've seen to win a race where the race actually went the distance since Cole Custer in Kentucky.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. And
Chris Buescher at Pocono, I'm throwing away. He didn't actually.
That was a fog. But that's the other thing too, is you can't be fooled by randomness in this sport. If we had a good race, the matchups went pretty well. We went 3-1 in the matchups that we played. We did have a little bit of Cindric at that 150 to 1 price. But if I'm truly being objective and I look back at this, I was naked on Chris Bell. And so I can't, yes, we got paid not nearly the amount that, we probably wish we had, but I have to look back at my handicapping to say, where did we go wrong? Because we didn't miss a car that was, a top 3 car. We missed the car that was clearly the best. And so I think it's important to assess what happened objectively. And we missed Chris Bell. And I think you have to look at, instead of what I thought when I looked at practice, he didn't look as good as he did at Phoenix. And I attributed that to the package. And because we did run the intermediate package at Gateway, where we run the short track package at Phoenix. Yep. So I didn't think it was going to translate as well. And now I was wrong about that. And so now if we do end up in a scenario like a short flat, which I think we have coming up in the future, I don't want to tip too many people off, but I think that you have to look at Chris Bell as being,
he's going to open as a favorite at the track that you're alluding to, in my opinion.
I would think
if he doesn't, I will be surprised. Maybe he's co-favorites with his teammate.
Yeah, I would assume that's the case with maybe both his teammates.
Yeah, that's
so
very
it could be all 3 of those guys go off at that short price. But hats off to Chris Bell. They were flawless all day. I questioned Adam Stevens on Twitter. I felt obligated to explain what was going on because the broadcast was a little laggy on that thing, a little laggy on that stuff. And I was shocked to see that how calm Adam Stevens was on the radio. And he's becoming one of these guys where if I disagree with him, I'm probably wrong, because he said we're doing
Hold
great
on, mark this down. 7 minutes, podcast 18 of the season. Werme says he doesn't know everything there is to know about NASCAR.
Compares himself to Adam Stevens.
We've heard of Monday Morning Quarterbacks. Apparently, you're the couch surfing crew chief.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm the Monday. I'm actually the Sunday night crew chief. Where it's easy. Oh, I would have taken 4 tires there. 4 tires wins the race every time. Or how does he? But Adam Stevens did a great job, and I thought that his car was so good it didn't matter his strategy, and that happens a few times a year. It was probably Phoenix was the last time we saw a car that was that fast where it kind of didn't matter the strategy. We saw it again this week. And you're going to have to take that into consideration when handicapping Chris Bell on short, flat tracks. I don't know what that means for a place like Nashville coming up that's a concrete track, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out this summer. But Chris Bell, incredible car. What an extremely lucky win for Austin Cindric at the cost of his teammate and Ryan Blaney just running out of fuel. And it's rare you have a mistake like that. You almost have to go back to last year at Watkins Glen when they thought that Chase Elliott could go 2 laps on the reserve after flipping the switch. Like, no, you can't go 4.5 miles on that.
Yeah, you might have been able to go 2.5 laps if we were at Bristol, or if we were at the Clash. Yeah. There's a chance.
Exactly. So, but a great race by Chris Bell. I think even though we got paid and we read matchups right, to not include Bell on the outright card, we need to take a look at that.
Yep. No, for sure. You always have to be objective when you're going back. You can cry about your losses, you can celebrate your wins, but it's what you're learning to take away going forward so you don't make the same mistakes multiple times. The one last thing I will say about Gateway, I mean, Team Penske went in with a strategy and they executed it. They took one less pit stop than everybody else, and it paid dividends for all of their drivers. For all intents and purposes, all 3 of them should have finished inside the top 10 with a Ryan Blaney win, Austin Cindric top 3, and Joey Logano kind of picking up the rear. You can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And for all of you college football fans out there, not 1, not 2, but 3 conference previews now live. Brad Powers does an outstanding job getting into Conference USA, the Mid-American, and most recently dropped the Mountain West. All of those podcasts deep dive all of the teams and provide a best bet that is pretty actionable. Make sure you listen when the moment they drop. Those things have a tendency to move. As we get into stage 2, Worm, and we look at a trip out to your beloved wine country at Sonoma, this year will mark the 35th running of the Toyota Save Mart 350, but we're going there under very different conditions, all things being equal. The track was repaved, the first repave in 23 years. The Cup Series will race at Sonoma's 1.99 mile configuration using the chute that connects turns 4 and 7 on the full layout. The full course, 12 turns, 2.5 miles. So this will be a little bit different. NASCAR, as we talked about at our first road course of the year, putting stage breaks back into the mix. So that changes a little bit of the way they handicap. Track comps, I'll ask you, and then we'll come back to the repave in a second. When you look at Sonoma, do you compare it to any of the other road courses, or is this kind of an entity unto itself?
I just think it's kind of sits alone relative to the other road courses. It just lower speeds. There was a lot more tire fall off. Now we have a repave. To ask for track comps at this point without seeing cars in the track is quite difficult. I do think that it's still the same layout. So you can kind of look at just past history, but man, you better take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because this track's going to be much different. Speeds are going to be way higher. Grip's going to be higher. Braking points are going to change. So really hard to kind of handicap this race based on what we've seen at this track or other road courses at this point without seeing cars on track.
Amongst the so-called short shots on the board, 2 of them will have double duty this weekend. We'll see Ty Gibbs run the Xfinity race and the Cup Series race. AJ Allmendinger will as well. I'd mentioned John Hunter Nemechek, but if he ends up going out there and winning the Cup race on Sunday, then we have a storyline that nobody saw coming in any capacity, given the equipment that they're working with at Legacy right now. As far as some unfamiliar faces that'll be known to an international audience, Cam Waters and Will Brown, both Australian drivers. Cam Waters will be driving for RFK Racing. Will Brown driving the 33 for RCR. These guys come from the Supercar Series, the same as Shane Van Gisbergen. But like when we talked off air earlier in the week, a little bit different when Cup drivers have been coming to Sonoma for years. It's not like we're going to a race course sight unseen and these guys are on a level playing field as some of the Cup regulars.
Yeah, the other thing that you kind of have to take into consideration when looking at some of these guys coming in and racing for the first time is their odds are automatically deflated because of what SVG did, right? So you have to imagine that they're overvalued instantly as soon as they enter the race, just because what we saw at SVG was remarkable at Chicago. But when you kind of peel back the layers of why that worked out, it does make more and more sense as to why SVG pulled this off. It's hard to know how good some of these guys are going to transfer to this sport. If someone has any sort of edge that they think, and by all means, go ahead and make that play. I just kind of operate under the idea that these guys are just going to be overvalued based on SVG. Bumpers are used here. SVG's gotten much better, I would say, at this style of racing.
Credit to him, by the way, for winning at Portland. I'm pretty sure he did an entire lap around that racetrack after he won drifting.
Yeah,
to try and prove his overall level of dominance.
That was like the biggest flex I've seen in racing in a while. You're racing in Portland while the Cup guys are in St. Louis, and you just go, I'm going to burn out the entire track. I think Jamie McMurray's like, I don't even know that there's 10 guys in the Cup Series that could pull that off, let alone anywhere in the world. So SVG is a talent. We're going to find out how good he is relative to some of these other Australian drivers. I still think that they tend to be overvalued. On the flip side, I think that this has to help Ty Gibbs. Absolutely, you're gonna understand where the braking points are, maybe the passing zones. I can't imagine that they changed that much, but I don't want to say for sure without seeing cars on the track. So Ty Gibbs and AJ Allmendinger both doing double duty. I think that both of them will be a factor in the race on Sunday. Maybe some of that early exposure to the track under race conditions can benefit them moving into Sunday.
One last thing before we get into some drivers that actually may have a slightly increased level of familiarity, given the fact that they tested here in late March with the repave. Shout out to Fox, who decided that, hey, we don't even need to send our announcing team out to Portland. Jamie McMurray and Adam Alexander calling play-by-play for that race from the Charlotte studio. Thankfully, we did have pit reporters, but it's all about cost savings these days, especially in the Xfinity series that Fox will have no investment in going forward after about another week. So you can understand why they go, we're just going to save our announcing team a cross-country flight. But I wanted to mention the test that was done here in late March. Martin Truex Jr., who has done phenomenally well at Sonoma in the past, Ross Chastain and Josh Berry all had a chance to run this course. Now, we know the weather conditions will be a little bit different. It'll be hotter and slicker as it typically is in early June compared to when they were there. But one of the bigger takeaways from Martin Truex, who's won this in 2013, 2018, 2019, and 2023, and I'll quote him directly, kind of just figured out the technique to get around this place, the old pavement and the tire wear and all that was kind of part of the magic that we had found and what I feel comfortable with. So this is a whole new ball game. We're going to have to approach it a little bit differently, but it's still the same track and the same kind of lines, and things work around here so far for me. So we learned a bunch today, and hopefully Goodyear will pick out a good tire, and then we can get to work on my car, making it faster. But you listen to DBC, and these guys say multiple seconds faster, so Lord only knows what we're actually going to get. But you can understand why Martin Truex, in terms of Tier 1 drivers, opens up as the favorite in that 6.5, 7-1 range.
Yeah, he's won all those previous times, 13, 18, 19th, and 20 in 23. So he's won 4 times. He also blew a cylinder. So he was riding around as short a cylinder and was running second. That's how much faster he was in 2017 when Kevin Harvick won. So I would say he had a massive lead and was able to still ride around in second place down a cylinder. So he probably could have won at least one more time there. He's clearly the best at this track of current drivers. I don't even think it's close. But for him to kind of have that quote saying, this is a whole new ball game, should maybe take everyone that looks at this race thinking, I have an edge, and say, well, if the best driver to run this in the Cup Series thinks it's a whole new ball game, maybe take a step back and say, maybe let the week come to us. Truex should be the favorite. It's crazy how bad he was in 2022, and then to turn around and
hold on. To Truex's credit, JGR just swung and missed.
Well, it was Toyota.
Everybody from JGR was awful in 2022.
Yeah. So kind of shocking that they were that bad, but then comes back and I think Bell was running, I think third a lot of the race, and obviously Hamlin was good last year. So I think Truex is going to be strong. Just not. I don't know that I can't see him going off at 4-1, but he'd have to be really fast to go off at that price, in my opinion.
There's a distinct possibility. We've seen that at road courses with Reddick and some of the guys. Do I think it's likely this weekend? No. But it is out of the realm of possibility when we know Martin Truex shows speed, unloads well, and sits on the pole. I mean, you said it yourself. If there's a driver you're going to pick that has capabilities to snooze the field, Martin Truex might be that guy. But
yeah, we used to love 6-1 was like, oh my gosh, we're getting 6-1 on Truex at Sonoma. Let's, max bet across all accounts. But, then they have one slip up in 22 and it's like, well, let's see what happens.
Those days were also when we went to 2 road courses. It was Sonoma where Truex was the guy and Watkins Glen. And pretty much everybody in the Cup Series treated these races as throwaways. Now they put a little bit more emphasis into it, and we've seen things get bunched up some. And as when we talk about Martin Truex, we have to mention his teammates as well. Not named Denny Hamlin are still Tier 1 drivers this week. In terms of Ty Gibbs, Christopher Bell right around 8-1, William Byron 8-1, Larson's number on the drift along with his teammate, and Chase Elliott at 9-1. Those are the guys that are all widely being priced as more or less favorites, co-favorites, depending on the terminology or vernacular you'd like to use to describe them.
Yeah, I think now is an important time to think about the playoff picture that we have and how stage breaks are going to affect the outcome of this race and season-long points. You look at a guy like Ty Gibbs, and he's one of the guys that I feel like can point his way in, as long as we, don't get, 16 winners. I don't think we'll have 16 winners, but I do think that Ty Gibbs is one of those guys where he could still point his way in. So I can't imagine Ty Gibbs is still racing for points, but I do want to talk about how important it is to understand the situation that each team and driver is in when it comes to betting this race, because the last thing you want is to have an outright on the winner of stage 2, because that guy has 0% chance of winning the race. So I guess unless there's a surprise, unless there's a car that's just so fast, or
unless we have a legitimate rocket ship,
unless we have a rocket ship, but not something we've seen in a while. I mean, it would have to be, man, like a Reddick from 2021 type speed at like Indy. We just haven't seen that kind of speed on a road course to where someone could drive up to the field that quickly. So Ty Gibbs, here's my issue with Ty. If you go back to COTA, where he ran second, he didn't. He ended up running third. I think Bell got second to William Byron. My issue with him was his average practice time, his average lap time was 0.2 faster than his fastest lap in the race. So it seems to me that Ty Gibbs is really good at qualifying and really good at practicing well. But once you get him out there with a lot of other cars, he struggles a little bit. And 8-1 on a guy that's never won a race, I think that's hard to back. I think if anything, I wouldn't even back him at, say, a 12-1 price. I think you'd have to see upwards of 15 or 16-1 in order to find some value on Ty Gibbs. When it comes to Chris Bell, gosh, he was fast at COTA, seems to show speed week in and week out. That's something that they don't have to worry about in that 20 camp, but also not stellar here at this particular track in Sonoma. I don't consider Chris Bell like this, road racing authority or road course authority. But he's run well. He ran well at COTA. But a lot of that was also the pit strategy, which we saw him stay out a little bit longer, have fresher tires at the end. And I think that was able to afford him the ability to at least push William Byron to the win. And then William Byron, 8-1. Gosh, it's really hard to back Byron, someone that's not a historically great road course racer, coming off of a win. You got to think he's a little bit overvalued. His average finished here in the next gen car is 11.5. He's got a finish of 9th and 14th. But this is one of those races where we've seen in the past drivers make mistakes, whether it was Kyle Larson not getting, having a loose wheel and have the tire fall off in 2022, or whether it's a speeding penalty. A lot can happen. Or guys run out of fuel, blow an engine, all these things.
If you're handicapping banking on guys running out of fuel,
that's exactly. But if he does,
let me tell you.
By the way, if you're banking on someone to run out of fuel or blow an engine, you need to get paid out at that 145-1 price, not an 8-1 price that we see on William Byron. I don't know. I don't see his price going anywhere. I'd be shocked if he, I wouldn't be shocked, but I'd be shocked if he pulled it and kind of dominated practice and we did see a shorter price on him.
When we start to look at some of the other tiers, you mentioned a little bit of strategy. That's where things start to get interesting. Tyler Reddick already has a win to his credit, so he could theoretically race for points. Chris Buescher does not. We've seen his number shorten throughout the course of the week, 16-1 kind of on the open, more or less a 12-1 consensus. A couple of road course specialists. AJ Allmendinger not racing for points, so he'll be out there racing for a checkered flag. Michael McDowell not going to point his way in. His only chance to get into the playoffs is with a victory. Denny Hamlin has also seen his number come down from an opener in that 20 to 22 range down to 18. A guy that we bet last road course got a great number, and that thing was in the circular file about 5 laps in.
Yeah, Hamlin's that's like a vanity bet usually on road courses to see, to steal a number at like 35 or 40-1, have him pull it, and never have a real opportunity to win the race. Poor finishes here, by the way, with I think an average finish of 33.5.
Good thing Tony Stewart's not running in this race.
I know. Otherwise, he'd have to pull over for him, which was, I don't know if you've watched NASCAR that long. Just a funky thing happened at Tony Stewart. And
rather bizarre to say the least.
Yeah, to say the least. But Tyler Reddick, if you were, you rewind back to, I guess, the beginning of last year, and you were to say you're going to get Tyler Reddick at 10-1 at a road course, it's like, oh my gosh, in Toyota's equipment, I can't imagine it. But we haven't seen the same speed out of him in this 45 car that we saw out of him in the 8 car. So, and the 8 car speed hasn't translated to Kyle Busch at all. So not quite sure what was that magic sauce that the 8 team and Tyler Reddick had, but we just haven't seen the same thing. Now, would I be shocked if he went out here and won the race? No, not at all. I think Tyler Reddick's a great road course racer. He just hasn't been the best car on a road course in a while. And he hasn't been the best car throughout the whole race, but throughout the races, sometimes you can see like, well, it looks like, this driver A is running the fastest lap times back in 6th or 7th place, where it's like, okay, if they ever got track position, they would get there or be hard to pass. We haven't seen that out of Tyler Reddick. In the past, we've seen him go out there, lead a lot of laps, have a lot of fast laps, and we're not seeing that in this 45 car. Going back all the way to, I guess, Coda last year would be the last time where I thought he had a real dominant car on a road course. So for people that like Tyler Reddick, I don't hate this number. 10-1. That's also a number that gets shortened up real quick if he takes the pole or looks good in practice. So he's a guy that you could see at that 4-1 range, 5-1 range if he does look good. So I don't hate Tyler Reddick that price.
When you look a little bit further down the board, drivers who need wins to try and get things going in the right direction, Ross Chastain, Kyle Busch, Joey Logano. I mean, if you wanted to touch on Austin Cindric and Daniel Suarez, Cindric we know is a good road course racer. Suarez won here 2 years ago. You mentioned some of the road course ringers, or we did at the top. The one thing I will say is Joey Logano opened up at a pick'em at a prominent shop out here against Will Brown. That number did not last long. Outright price is the exact same, but Joey Logano, a $2 favorite in that head-to-head. So clearly guys took umbrage with the way that was priced. But these are guys, for the most part, that have to win races in Ross Chastain, Kyle Busch, and Joey Logano. When you look at Chastain, road course dominance hasn't quite been there. Kyle Busch, the model of inconsistency. Joey Logano quietly has put together 2 top 5s in the last 3 trips here, but I don't think of him really ever as a road course ringer or someone that you want to have exposure to. And then, of course, Cindric and Suarez. Any of those guys that you wanted to touch on, by all means, knock yourself out.
Well, Chastain, I think, does have a little bit of an edge, and I just say a little bit because he did do the tire test. Been pretty consistent on road courses. He's a guy where you can probably find him in some matchups. He's not going to blow the doors off in qualifying. So I do think that there might be some value on him when it comes to these head-to-heads, but not really at that 25-1 win price. Kyle Busch, that was a looking back at the Kyle and Kyle incident last week, you can't do that. Not when you're fighting for points. You cannot take a 10th to 12th place finish and turn it into a DFL. That's just not something you can do.
A DFL? What's a DFL?
Dead fucking last.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
second to last. Josh Berry, I thought was
okay. Well, second to DFL. You can't DFL. That's my DNF is DFL.
I don't mind that terminology. I just hadn't heard that before. I thought you were going dyslexic on us, but
nope, just DFL. So kind of inexcusable. Again, another guy where if there was a glimmer of speed or hope, this would be a place where, gosh, he can really set himself apart. He's been fast here in the past. But man, he's tough to back in almost anything at this point, just because he tends to lose his mind and not finish races. And that's just crazy to think. Austin Cindric, coming off of a lottery ticket win.
I got a feeling he's one that could be racing for points. If he doesn't think he can win, he's in a spot now where he'd be the perfect guy to go out there and win stage 2.
Well, I think so for Cindric, and this is good. And by the way, Todd and I talk a lot when we were saying, it in the amount of time that when Todd texted me about the Logano matchup, what Logano Brown matchup, in the amount of time that it took for me to do a little research on that, the thing went to -200. We have kind of fragile markets when they open here.
Early bird gets the worm, Worms. Or early bird gets the worm.
Well, the early bird got the worm with 8-1 and McDowell top 10 last week. I think
we can blame longtime listener of the Bet the Board podcast, Ryan, for patting himself on the back and patting us on the back, as if closing line value went a long way. When you get 8-1 at a top 10 price, he goes off at north of -$2, and we come up snake eyes.
Well, we were like 55 laps in. I'm like, he has no chance. Like
none.
This 8-1 that closed -$2 all of a sudden has zero chance at winning. I would have sold that ticket for a bag of peanuts if I could. So It is important to understand where these teams are at. And I mentioned it earlier. Cindric might be the perfect guy that can go out there and win stage 1, win stage 2, take himself out of winning the race, but he's also a guy that back in traffic, if he does have 3 or 4 lap fresher tires, can actually set up passes and work his way back up through the field. We saw it back in 2021 at Road America. He went out there and won stages and worked his way back up into the top 10. So that win gives them a lot of flexibility. It also gives them the opportunity to maybe stretch something on fuel or take a different strategy approach. And Cindric, if he gets out front on the same tire strategy or a slightly better, or even on older tires, I trust Austin Cindric out front in a road course. We've seen him lead laps, and I think he was the 33 car here when he was running in the Xfinity Series. And I think it was at, Indy, I think he ran. He qualified well and was running up front. So he does have that road course in the background. Now he's got a win to bank. So Cindric's one of those guys where I think I like that 30-1 win price more than I do matchups, because the last thing you want to do is have your eggs in a basket of a guy that is just going to try to get points. Because if that's the case, you're going to think you have a chance at winning matchups, and then they're going to pit late or they're going to pit early, and you could find yourself behind the 8 ball. So it is interesting to think of all the unknowns we have going into this race. And so much of it has to also depends on qualifying. If Cindric is up there in the top 3 or 4, I don't think he's going for stage points. If he qualifies up there, I think he's going up there for the win. But if he qualifies 16th, 17th, or 18th, and you're not able to make passes, the whole race strategy could just change. And you better understand what's important to each one of these teams before you go and back them or fade them when it comes to Sonoma and all the strategy that's going to happen during stage breaks.
And I think it's worth reading some of these driver comments and listening to some of the interviews based on what their expectations are going into practice versus where they'll qualify to start the race. So a lot of unique variables when you look at the outright market. Of course, as always, we'll do everything we can to share a best bet in terms of race day from a head-to-head matchup when there's a lot more liquidity and some wider availability for some of those particular prices. Waving the green, white checkered flag on stage 2. You can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Worm, I kind of said dealer's choice for stage 3. And we had talked a couple weeks ago about, balancing your outright card with long shots, not necessarily saying that you had losers going in, but drivers that you didn't really expect to win the race, but you had to take a little bit of value. Lo and behold, some of those lessons come to fruition this past weekend. For any folks that had access to numbers, potentially even post-qualifying, you could have had Austin Cindric around that 80-1 or 100-1 threshold. When you're looking at some of those dynamics that are out there, I mean, we can sit here and encourage people, go ahead and try and find an out that has stale numbers, and that's going to be the best way that you can beat the outright market. That's not exactly the best way to approach it. But are we at a point in the sport where certain tracks you are more willing to bet some of these long shot prices
Absolutely.
than you've been in the past?
Absolutely. And Gateway's one of them. There was in the pre-race poll, I listed 25 drivers that if they got the lead late in the race, that they were going to be really hard to pass. And that's one of those tracks where it didn't happen in the way that I thought it would. I didn't see a blown engine. I didn't see running out of fuel. Those were things but that's the thing. That's the thing about a black swan is you don't know what you don't know, and you don't see them coming. And it's easy to explain them after the fact. It's easy to go, oh, well, Chris Bell was bitching about shifting in practice, but you're not going to go, oh, well, maybe with 20 to go, he's going to blow an engine, or like, wow, that was a really fast stop that Blaney had. I wonder if they got it full on fuel, because this happens once every 2 or 3 years. Something like this happens. Usually when you run out of fuel, it is, hey, we might be close on fuel. Save wherever you can. And by the way, you have a 3.5 second lead. Save us 1 lap just in case. So where I think that you want to have, I would say less allocation on favorites and more on longer shots are track position type tracks. A place like Gateway for sure is one of those where gosh, you just get the lead. Look at Chris Bell. Can we all agree that Chris Bell was dominant?
The fastest car, not even close.
Car without question. It took him 35, 36 laps to pass Michael McDowell that finished God knows where. So, that's a place where if that was at Phoenix or a place where, or like a Darlington, or those guys just get McDowell when they lasted 5 laps out front. So
I mean, even trying to pass Ryan Blaney late where you knew Christopher Bell was the fastest car. Credit Blaney for trying to take away his lane. But I honestly, as a race fan, would have been real curious to see how that thing played out, all things being equal, with Bell having his full capacity in his race car and Ryan Blaney having enough fuel to try and get there, if he'd have been able to try and continue blocking him and taking away his line. But to your point, I think certain tracks lend themselves. Gateway in the past, I would have said, you could make a case for Team Penske given how well they've raced, but it's always interesting for some of these spots that are out there. I know we'll go to Pocono in a couple of weeks, another track where, hey, look, somebody may try and go out there and save fuel, so you're going to have an opportunity. Speed trumps all, but there are other paths to trying to get an outright winner home, and I think it's so important why we always emphasize looking for prices, trying to build your outright card accordingly, and rather than going all in with, I think this guy has the fastest car. In a sport where things that can go wrong often do go wrong, you have to think a little bit outside the box to try and create it. And, even going back to what we said, we thought there was going to be an opportunity that, some good cars that weren't going to qualify well might have a chance to steal track position. Did that come to fruition? No. I mean, we had Ross Chastain. I don't think I saw his name mentioned on the broadcast once. Chris Buescher.
Did he race even?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. He might have been out there trying to collect a check. Chris Buescher, another one. But, I mean, even Chase Elliott, his number drifted out to 40 or 50 to 1. And if the cautions fall the right way, suddenly we're talking about the 9 car very much in contention for a top 10. He just started to fall like a rock after the last green flag stop. So I think it's always interesting when you look at this sport more than a lot of others, trying to figure out, okay, what could possibly go wrong? How do I protect myself for what you describe as a black swan event?
Well, I think a lot of people in the NASCAR betting community, most people looking at the same stuff. And it's just a matter of everyone knew that the Fords and Penske were going to be fast last week. I don't think anyone saw Chris Bell going out there and dominating, but for the most part, everyone kind of had this idea of who was going to be the best, but who was able to profit off of it and who was able to maybe break even and not lose money. So much of this is survive in advance. And, what's Warren Buffett's top 3 rules for business is rule number 1, stay in business. Rule number 2, stay in business. And then rule number 3 is see rules 1 and 2. You just have to stay in business. And I think that's one thing, the art of building a card. You have to figure out a way to have some of these guys out there that if they do get out front, they can win. And you have to properly evaluate that car. I thought that Cindric at 80 to 1 at a track where he's been successful, where we also anticipated him. We talked about it last week. I had a few people message me saying that they had him at 300 to 1.
It's a hell of a pull for them. Hell of a pull.
I'm like, I don't remember saying no, you said that this was his best oval and that it's because of the shifting. And I'm like, shit, can you tell me what's going to happen this week? Because I would have loved a little of that 300.
Yeah, what's the crystal ball spitting out for Sonoma? Of all those people want to slide into Worm's DMs again.
Yeah. Okay, after listening to this podcast, who do you think is going to win? Who do you think I think is going to win the race without me knowing? But it is important to just kind of, there's been some weeks where, we haven't had the week where we just had a clean sweep of the board and a massive win. But we haven't had any of those weeks where it's, we got everything wrong. And I think we've done a good job of just kind of the definition of a grind. And that's because we've had race cards that have had a little bit, I guess, of anti-fragility built into it, because when things go bad, it hasn't hurt us too much. And in this case, it actually helped us out a little bit with not having Bell. So you got to pick your spots. I think there's certain tracks where you can kind of go all in on a couple of drivers, Darlington, Homestead, but you get into these races where 2 tires, no tires, and fuel the more strategy that's played the higher odds guys you'd want to take. I think that's
Yep.
what I'm distilling this down to is, and Sonoma, Sonoma's going to be a fuel thing because I don't think we're going to have a lot of tire fall off. You're not going to see,
that begs the question. You wonder if we're going to see different drivers try and go no tires. I mean, with the repave, who knows what the hell someone may try late in this race. Whereas in the past at Sonoma, there was actual tire wear and you couldn't go without taking 4 tires.
Well, we used to see, there was always, stage breaks really do make the predictability of these road courses and strategy a little different. So, gosh, I remember there was times when Marcos Ambrose was, he was so much faster he could 4-stop and still he could 4-stop and beat the 3-stop guys. With lack of tire fall off this week, if we do see for whatever reason 2 tire stops, I just don't see it because now that I talk about it, you're just going to get inside your window and take as much fuel as you can. Once you're inside your window, you're pitting, you're taking, and then you're not going to get on pit road again. I just can't imagine tires mattering that much. So with stage breaks on road courses, I think there's less strategy just because you kind of know when the cautions are going to come. But again, we still don't know. We still haven't seen cars on track. It's one thing to go out there with 3 cars that are testing. It's another thing to put 35 cars out there and see what happens because those bumpers tend to get used. And I think that's the biggest difference for some of these rookies when they come in is how aggressive these NASCAR restarts are. So I think that building a car, that's the true art of this sport. It's easy sometimes just pick the winner.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the other thought process there, and this isn't meant to be disparaging or anything like that, because as we know, our primary goal on this show is to educate our listeners who are gracious enough with their time to tune in, listen to our ramblings, and hopefully come away with some of their own takeaways that allow them to make informed betting decisions, not just in NASCAR, but other sports. I mean, if you could tell me, figure we bet of a 36 race schedule, we may bet 26 to 28 races thereabouts. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're going to tell me I can take away 1.5 to 2 positions per race, I'm absolutely thrilled given the size and strength of positions. But I know a lot of people see it, I have to make 10 to 15 positions. Look, that's not always a realistic approach for when you're going into all this. You can create a lot more volatility. And regardless of what size your position is, the last thing you want to do is put yourself on that roller coaster to go, all right, I made a substantial amount this week. I gave it all back the next, but you do have to try and bide your time and look to capitalize when opportunity presents itself.
Yeah. I think the other thing too, is we had a very small amount of money, relatively speaking on Austin Cindric, but that's because I didn't think it was going to happen. Right. I did not see both of those things happening. And I also didn't see him being a top 3 car, if I'm completely honest, but with this particular next gen car, anyone can kind of go up there and block their way to a win, especially at a place like Gateway. So I think you just kind of keep that in mind, moving forward. I do think we'll see a little bit more fall off at Iowa next week. Loudon, you're going to see fall off. Nashville, fall off. But Chicago is one of those places where I think that there's any number of road course racers that get out front, they'd have a chance. So I do think Chicago could be one of those places where you could have a longer shot hit. Pocono, again, strategy laden race. So you throw fuel in the mix, you throw a weird caution with like 7 to go in a stage, and some people might decide to flip there, others might not. So it all depends on the track. And then we go back to Indy. Indy we haven't been on the oval there in a while, so it'll be interesting to see if any of the
Speaking of Indy, Kyle Busch testing session cut short earlier this week.
Weird. He spun out. Huh.
Got himself into a little bit of a wreck, checked out of the infield care center, and did not complete testing on the second day.
It is that is just peak Kyle Busch this year. I just
wonder who he blamed.
Couldn't even finish a test session. Like that's if you had to pick someone to spin or wreck in practice, he's got to be the favorite. Like if you could bet wreck in practice, or like I know you can bet first retirement.
I'm making BJ McLeod the favorite.
Yeah, maybe. I'm still putting Kyle Busch. You're probably gonna get paid a little better if Kyle Busch, because he's been I don't know. I'm kind of disappointed with Kyle this year, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes with RCR, and I can't imagine the pressure he's feeling. But you got to imagine he's a top 3-4 talent every time you step on the track.
You're pushing for the F1 market, first car to retire. You're trying to bet Kyle
first
Busch
retirement, but first retirement. You could do it in practice and the race. I think if you bet Kyle Busch at a decent price, you make money long run there.
All right, we've done enough rambling. It's all about trying to identify, at least pre-week wise, what we think creates a little bit of opportunity in a segment we love to call the best bet. And as you look at the Sonoma board, we talked about the unknowns, the unpredictability, the repave, which should make this surface a little bit faster than what we've seen in the past. Anything to try and start building our racing card before we round things out on Sunday afternoon?
Well, we're going to stick with someone that I think has been consistent on speed, not necessarily consistent on qualifying, and that's with Chris Buescher. He has the best average finish here at this track over the last few years in this car. The reason I like this bet is Chris Buescher top 5. He's plus 220 on Sears. He's down to plus 180 at some of the other shops. I would make sure you get 2-1 or better on this price. The reason I like Chris Buescher is even if he does start kind of back in the field at like 18th or 19th, I don't think he's in a position to be points racing at all. I think he knows he needs a win. And if you're looking at a track where he has the best average finish in the field, you certainly have to think that this is a place where he thinks he can win. Throw in the fact that he's had speed recently at these tracks. I know Gateway was kind of an abomination, but that was just kind of a whole weekend of struggles for him. But going back to Charlotte, again, struggles, but showed a lot of speed in his race car, and we know the kind of speed he had at Darlington and Kansas. If any of that speed can transfer over, remember, we hadn't seen speed out of him in the last couple of years leading into Sonoma. We now see him showing speed leading into Sonoma. Hopefully that can equate to a potential win for this 17 car. But certainly like that plus 220 top 5 price. You know, we've seen that his outright has gone from, I think, between 16 and 18-1 down to 12-1. Yep. We haven't seen the same movement on the top 5 market. So that's why I'd like to take advantage of that there.
It's all about the derivatives and what's out there and where you can identify a little bit of opportunity. As far as your schedule, pre-race poll on Sunday, when can the Bet the Board listeners expect you to go live with your post-practice pre-race show?
Well, it's going to be kind of the same time. We're going to go at 10:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern. It's 2 hours before the race. Come enjoy a beverage. We'll talk it out. And it's been great. We found some pretty damn good bets the last couple of weeks, just having the conversation. It did help that all the bets populated during the pre-race poll.
Somewhere along the way, these head-to-head matchups are going to come up more than 2 hours before the race. At least I hope, right?
You would think, the fact that only half of them were up when I went live, and then to have the rest of them populate. I mean, that's the first time that's happened this year. But man, when they popped, we were able to jump on a few. And that's the other thing. It's just a great kind of hive mind deal where we can just talk through these bets and figure out what's right. It doesn't matter who's right. Let's just get it right. And it's not our bets versus each other. It's definitely us versus the house. And we've been able to capitalize. I think it's been pretty productive this year. So that'll go live on X and YouTube at 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific.
Are you going glass of vino this week for Wine Country?
I might go full bottle.
Instead of the hard side. You're going to go through a whole bottle.
Maybe the full bottle pull. That would be I can't do that. That's not happening.
I would say for the health, safety of you, our listeners, and most importantly, your lovely wife, I would encourage you to kind of avoid that and maybe just go with a couple of glasses from your box of Franz.
Yeah, we did go public with.
I was going to give you a chance the floor. That's how I wanted to close the show. So big announcement.
Yeah.
The Bet the Board NASCAR family is apparently growing.
Yeah. My wife and I have a little baby boy on the way, healthy, going to be due November 14th is the due date. Most people will go out and promote and say, hey, this is the 2050, NASCAR champion. No, I'm having a crew chief for a son. That's what I'm having. There is no way that this kid's going to sit and watch this sport with me. And the amount of bitching that I do at crew chiefs when it comes to strategy, or I just can't imagine. I can't imagine having a driver. I want the guy calling the shots. So I went with, And maybe this is a great opportunity for me to reach out to Eric Jones, who has a kid on the way, and also Bubba Wallace. Maybe we have a future crew chief for either of those two kids that are going to be born here kind of all around the same time. So super excited to, have a healthy kid on the way, and my wife's been great about everything. So it's nice to have a DD, everywhere you go as well. So.
Well, I was going to say, if our bet the board Stay Green listeners want to make a bet, maybe if the baby arrives a few days early on Sunday, November 10th, it would only be fitting on the day that we crown a NASCAR champion for 2024 is the day that the Werme family welcomes in the next generation. So
the next generation of degenerates.
That's my bet. Sunday, November 10th will be the official birthday. But congratulations to you and your lovely wife. Momentous occasion there. And thanks from all of our listeners for waiting until the season was over to make sure that you go through parenting. And we'll expect your undivided attention by the time that we go away from a plate track in late February for the 2025 campaign.
There's very few people that understand how good that timing worked out, So, but, just have happy and healthy. Or, well, at least healthy, hopefully happy. Super excited. So,
no, it's a great milestone. It puts things in perspective much more than even landing some of the long shots that we will intend to do from now until we crown a champion. So, best of luck to all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners. Thanks as always for tuning in. And like we said, plenty of college football content on the channel as well for some of the smaller conferences, Conference USA, the MAC, the Mountain West, as only Brad Powers does. But most importantly, when it comes to Sonoma with a Chris Busher. Chris Busher. I almost said Chris Bell. I was going to really correct things. Chris Busher, top 5, ticket in hand, come Sunday afternoon. We'll see you at the window.